today's lesson, I want to take a stab at describing modes in a way that is easily understandable and functional. As I see it, there are two ways to understand modes, and I call these the tonal and chromatic perspectives. The tonal perspective is where we examine a particular scale to understand the modes that can be derived from it, looking at each mode in the context of its parent scale or key. The chromatic perspective is what I call it when we look at each mode individually outside of the context of its parent scale or key. When trying to understand a new mode in the chromatic perspective, I think of it from one specific note so that I can get to know the new sound. I look at it on a single string so I can better understand the intervals, and I play different modes starting at the same note so I can compare them and hear the differences between them. Instead of staying in a particular key, you then are beginning all of the modes from the same note so that you can more clearly compare the different sounds that they create. When I look at a mode from the chromatic perspective, I can more easily see it as a combination of different intervals that create the specific sound of that mode. We describe the sounds and intervals of a mode against the major scale. So when you're describing the intervals that make up any specific mode, you're essentially just comparing it against the intervals that make up the major scale. This is why we number scale notes 1 through 7 with the natural numbers being the notes that make up the major scale. When we describe, for instance, the Lydian scale, which is the fourth mode of the major scale, we use the same 1 through 7 numbers, but to describe the difference between Lydian and major, we'd say Lydian has a raised fourth or a sharp 4. So I'm going to go through the modes of the major scale, first from a tonal perspective in the key of C, and then from a chromatic perspective using E at the open first string as a starting note for all of the modes. I'm going to begin the explanation of the tonal perspective by describing how to derive modes from any scale. I think of the notes of any scale as being situated around a circle with a root note at the top. When I play the notes clockwise around the circle, I'm ascending up the scale. When I play the notes counterclockwise, I'm descending down the scale. Looking at the key of C, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. If we play them in that order, starting at C and ending at C, then play a C major 7 chord, that sounds very much like C major. Now, if we keep all the notes the same, keeping C major as our parent key, and just rotate the circle counterclockwise so that instead of C being at the top, D is now at the top, we are looking at the key of C from the second note, which is D. The chord that goes along with the second note of a major scale is a minor 7 chord. From the 3rd fret on the 2nd string, I'm going to play this series of notes again, which is just the C major scale, but played from D to D instead. If you get the sound of C major out of your ears before you do this, you'll be able to hear the specific sound of this mode, which is called Dorian, also known as the 2nd mode of the major scale. So we're going to follow that same idea through the rest of the major scale now. So next up is E. Now we shift the circle again so that E is at the top now, and we begin and end our scale on E to hear the sound of the 3rd mode, which is Phrygian. The 4th note of the C scale is F. So now we shift the circle again and place F at the top, and we can play a major 7 chord. Now, starting from F at the 2nd string 6th fret, we are going to play the same set of notes, but from F up to the higher F and back down. So this makes the 4th mode, or F Lydian mode. The fifth note of the C major scale is G. The 5 chord in C is a G7, so we'll play that and then begin the scale at the 2nd string, 8th fret. And this makes the 5th mode, or the Mixolydian mode. The 6th note of the C major scale is A, so looking at the circle from A to A gives us the A natural minor scale, also known as Aeolian. I just call it natural minor though. The chord is a minor 7 chord, and I'm going to play it down an octave, so here at the open strings. To play the scale from A to A, I'm going to start at the 2nd string, 10th fret. The final mode of the major scale begins on B and is the 7th mode, or the Locrian mode. The chord that goes along with this mode is a minor 7 flat 5, or a half diminished chord, which is a diminished triad with a flat 7. So I'll play a B half diminished followed by the notes of the scale starting at the open 2nd string and going from B to B and back down. That is the tonal perspective in a nutshell. This is how modes are derived, and specifically how I think of them using the circle of notes like in the images that I've shown you. You can use the same circle method to figure out the modes of any particular scale. Now I'm going to take the modes out of the context of a parent scale and look at them in each individually side by side to get a better comparison of the different sounds that these make available to us. For this, I'm thinking not in note names, though I am aware of what notes I'm playing, but I'm thinking in intervals. Each mode is made up of a unique set of intervals that gives it its unique particular sound. Beginning with the major scale, I can see the intervals around the circle. E is my 1, and the intervals are the natural numbers 1 through 7, which is the major scale. So I'm going to play this from the open 1st string, and then I'll play up and down, and then the corresponding chord, which is E major 7. And I'm also going to play the chord right next to it in the scale to give it some context. So the 2nd chord is F sharp minor 7. So I'm going to play E major 7 to F sharp minor 7, back to E major 7, and then play the scale. Now, instead of moving to the 2nd note of the E major scale and playing it from there, I'm going to take the intervals of the 2nd mode, the Dorian mode, and put them right into the same spot, at E on the 1st string. So now if you look at the circle, the numbers have changed. You have 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, and flat 7. If we think of this pattern in comparison to the intervals of the major scale, you can see that we've lowered the 3rd and the 7th notes by a half step. The lowered 3rd makes this a minor scale, different from the natural minor scale because natural minor has a flat 6 while the Dorian mode has a natural 6, just like the major scale does. So taking the 1, 3, 5, and 7, we get a minor 7 chord, and next to it is another minor 7 chord. So from the open string, we have 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and 1, and back down. So this is how I get to know the sound of a new mode. I want it in my ears so I can hear the intervals, and once I can hear it, then I can start using it in my playing. So moving on, now we'll look at the third mode, which is Phrygian. The intervals of this mode, as compared to the major scale, are 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, and flat 7. This is different from the natural minor scale only in that it has a lowered or a flat second note. The chord is a minor 7 chord, and the chord next to it is a major 7, a half step up. So here's the scale up and down, followed by the chords. The fourth mode is Lydian. The intervals are 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, 7, and the octave. The only difference from the major scale is the raised fourth. The chord that goes along with it is a major 7, and the next chord up in that scale is a dominant 7. So here's the scale followed by the chord. The fifth mode, or Mixolydian, is the same as a major scale, except that the seventh note is lowered a half step, or flat. So we have flat 7. So the intervals are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and then the octave. The chord is a dominant 7 chord, and the next chord up in the scale is a minor 7 chord, a whole step away. So here it is. The sixth mode is the natural minor, or the Aeolian scale. As I said earlier, I just call it natural minor, or just minor for short. The intervals here are 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, and the octave. The chord is a minor 7 chord, and the next chord in the scale is a half diminished chord, a whole step up. So here it is. So the seventh and final mode is the Locrian mode, and the intervals are 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, flat 7, and 1. So this is a very dark sounding mode that has almost every note lowered. The chord that goes along with this is a half diminished 7 chord, because we have a diminished triad with the flat 7 on top. And I don't like to play the next chord in the scale with this one because I think it kind of obscures the sound of the mode for me. So my ear starts to hear it as major, so I just play the half diminished chord on this one. So here's the Locrian scale. So there is the basic idea of those two approaches. I hope this video helps with your understanding of how modes are derived and some different ways that you can think about them. I want to end on a brief explanation of how you can start implementing these into your playing. I think the best way to start is by taking them one at a time and setting up a loop for yourself using the chords I showed for each mode in the chromatic perspective section of this video. For instance, if you want to get more familiar with the sound of Dorian, set up a loop where you're playing an E minor 7 to an F sharp minor 7 to a beat or a metronome, and then play the Dorian mode in time on a single string, and then try improvising with the scale on that string. Once you feel comfortable with the sound, try expanding to other strings. Start with just adding one note on the second string and play with that for a while, then try adding more notes. To really have a fully functional concept of how to use these in your playing, you need to understand how chords function within a chord progression. I don't advise taking an approach where you're thinking in a different mode for every chord you play. Rather, you should be thinking about the chord and what notes are in the chord, and then the modes help you to fill in the blanks between chord tones. If you're playing a progression that stays all in one key, you need not really think about the modes. A progression like E major 7, A major 7, F sharp minor 7, to B7 sus is all in the key of E. So when you're playing an E major scale, you are already playing in all those modes simultaneously. So over this progression, I wouldn't think in modes, but rather in touching on chord tones to play something relevant to the harmony, like this. So it's all E major except for a little chromatic note, but letting the harmony guide my movements. Things get a little more complicated when you move into chord progressions that move between different keys, but that's really a huge topic that I won't get into here today. For now, if you're trying to get more familiar with the modes, try looping a chord or two chords that go with each mode, or finding a backing track that is for a specific mode that someone's created. And spend some time with each of them. Maybe spend a couple of days playing in a certain mode so you can really get a feel for it, then move to the next. You should do whatever works for you, but try to move through all of them systematically so you can start to understand how each of them feels and sounds. That is all for now, but if you have any questions, leave me a comment, and you can visit my website to download a free PDF of the visual aids in this video on my site. Also, sign up for the mailing list because I have a lot of exciting new things coming up that I want to tell you about. Happy practicing!